So as I mentioned, I got the pleasure to meet our speakers last night, and I'm really excited to introduce our first speaker. Jon Jorgenson starred for 2 years as Sky, the lead in Mamma Mia on Broadway that closed last year, which makes my musical theater family really happy. He's the co-creator of the Anima series, the author of Authentic Love, and Created to Create, and he's a huge Chicago Bulls fan, which of course may not be popular here in Phoenix, but it's popular to a few of you. That's good. I didn't cut that out of his bio. See, I like that. I appreciate you. He's a storyteller. He tells stories in his books as an author, on stage as an actor, online as a blogger, and in rhyme as a YouTuber and a spoken word poet. He tells stories about art, about leadership, about people, and about hope, about sports, and actually about Legos. He tells stories online, on stage, in writing, and in rhyme. And he also tells stories about everything in hopes of pointing towards the one thing that really matters. Ladies and gentlemen, Jon Jorgenson.
Hey everybody. Am I on? Am I even on? I don't even know. No? Good. That was the hope. Hello. Am I on now? All right, well, I'm an actor, so I don't need it. I can fill up this room. I used to live in a gap, in a valley, in the space between who I actually was and what I allowed to be seen. You see, as a teen, I had it pretty rough. And not because my upbringing was particularly tough, but because of arrogance and pride, I got myself into some pretty stupid stuff. Selfishness, hypocrisy, lying, and cheating. I tried to break out, but the cycle kept repeating, and I did everything I could to hide the real life I was leading, to make certain that nobody knew. And I was succeeding because I'd hidden it from view, or so I thought. But just because you're not getting caught doesn't mean there's not a battle being fought. And I kept losing, and the sins kept bruising. And I'm not trying to skirt responsibility because it was completely my choosing. Then one day, in front of a bunch of people, I was asked to tell my story. And at first, I thought, hell no, that'll be way too gory. They'll scream for my head when they find out I'm spiritually dead. They'll skin my hide when they see what's really inside. But somehow, I opened my mouth, and I let the secret slide. And I spoke, and I spoke, and I spoke, until I cried. And what happened next, I'll never forget. Instead of casting me out with judgmental stares, after sharing my story, people started sharing theirs. Addiction, jealousy, lying, unforgiveness. It seemed like everybody had some secret sickness. Everyone was struggling. Everyone was weak, just needing someone to give them the courage to speak or the permission. So I made it my mission to tell my story. Because you see, everyone has a secret that needs to be spoken. Everyone has a silence that needs to be broken, but someone has to be the first one to talk. Someone's got to be brave enough to share their walk, even if it looks more like a crawl. Don't be ashamed, because we all fall. And the biggest mistake is believing the lie that you're the only one. So don't stall, run, and tell your story. I'm not saying you have to tell all, but if you feel it, answer the call and tell your story. Tell it in your own way. Tell it every day. Tell your story. In the right time and the right place, remove the mask from your face and weave a tale full of grace. Tell your story. Tell it far and tell it near. Tell it to anyone who will hear, and tell it without fear. Tell your story, not just for yourself, not just for others, but tell it for His glory. Hi, everyone. My name is Jon. Thank you. Thank you. Well, my name is Jon, as Todd said, and I am a storyteller. Ever since I can remember, I have been infatuated with and have wanted to tell stories. And today is no different. I am here simply to tell you some stories today. But before I do, I want to make a few caveats. I want to warn you or make you aware of 3 things before I start. Number 1 is that I am a man. Number 2 is that I am a Christian. And number 3 is that I am an artist. Now, I tell you all of these things and I make you aware of them because I want you to understand that this is the lens, or this is the vessel through which I tell my stories. As an artist, many of my stories and the way that I tell them, they take on sort of a creative bent, like poetry, like you just heard. And you'll hear more like that. As a Christian, many of my stories include talk about faith and God. And if that's not your beat, I am not here to try and convert you, I promise, so you can take a big old breath. That is not my mission here. That's just me being honest, because that is part of my story. And as a man, I tell stories because I'm a crappy listener. It's just the way it is. And it's quite possible, in fact, I would be willing to bet that most of you in this room cannot relate with all 3 of those things. But just because you may not be able to relate to some of the specifics of my story does not mean that you can't apply maybe some of the themes to your own life. And that's the reason that I tell stories. Not because I think that my life is so incredibly interesting, but because I believe that telling your story is the fastest way to help others discover theirs. And so maybe you're out there today and you're thinking, you know what? I'm a businesswoman. I'm not an artist. I'm not going to get anything out of this. I'm going to get another quiche. Which I think they're tearing it down anyway, so I'm sorry. Or maybe you're thinking, whoa, I am not a Christian. I have no interest in this guy trying to convert me. Or maybe you're thinking, I have no interest in listening to another white man talk. I thought this was a Women of Strength conference. And if that's how you feel, that's totally valid and that's totally fine. But I want to encourage all of us today, myself included, to look at one another simply as human beings who have stories to share. And maybe, just maybe, you might discover something in my story that will help you write yours. Can you do that for me? All right. Now, in the poem I just read you, I referenced the first time that I told my story. And when I say tell your story, let's define what that means real quick. I believe that telling your story is being open and honest about who you are. And that doesn't have to be up on a stage in front of a group of people. That can be in your living room, at home. That can be in your office, anywhere. It is about being open and honest about who you are. And I remember so clearly the first time that I did that. It was at a summer camp that I grew up going to. And this summer camp is one I went to when I was in high school every single summer. And I would go to this sleepaway camp, and it's basically a mix of a summer camp, a theater camp, and a Christian camp. So it's all of the most stereotypical types of youth camp just crammed into one week. And this camp, it played a pivotal role in my life. I have friendships from that camp that are still strong today. It was where I discovered my passion for theater and performing, and it's also where I discovered my love for God. But the problem was that after the week of camp was over and the summer ended, I had to go back to high school. And while I was in high school, I was a very different person than the person I was at camp. You see, at camp, I was this upstanding Christian guy. But at school, I began to struggle with all the same things that any teenage boy might struggle with. Swearing, partying, drinking, girls, you name it. And so, for years, I lived my life as almost 2 completely separate people, depending on whether I was at camp or whether I was at school. But then, after I graduated from high school, one of my counselors, she asked me to come back to this camp and to give my testimony. And a testimony is really just Christian speak for come in and tell us about what a terrible person you were and then how God changed your life. But you see, the problem was that God really hadn't changed my life. God had changed 1 week of my life every year. But that was it. And for some reason, even though I knew this was true, even though I knew I was living a life of hypocrisy and lies, I still accepted her invitation. And I remember the night before I was supposed to talk, I had the closest thing I've ever had to a nervous breakdown. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even speak and scream for someone to come help me. And I remember my bed felt like a rushing ocean or like a huge river. So I laid flat on the bathroom floor because it was the most solid thing that I could find. And in that moment, I realized I had a choice. Either I could continue this lie and this life of hypocrisy and tell everyone how God had changed my life and now I'm a completely different person. Or I could tell the truth. And the next night, in front of 100 high school students, many of which were the younger brothers and sisters of some of my closest friends, I told them the truth. I opened up, and I told them about my struggles and my weaknesses and my mistakes. I told them my story. And I'll be honest, I expected them to start hurling fruit at me. I expected to be excommunicated from this camp. But something very different happened. As soon as I was done talking, students started running up to me and telling me stories of their struggles and their weaknesses and their mistakes. And it was in that moment that I realized something. That sharing our stories gives others the strength to share their own. You see, in life, we're always taught to appear as though we have it all together, especially in business. But actually, what I've discovered is the best thing we can do in any aspect of our lives is be honest about who we are and about where we are. You see, if we can be honest with a business client, we give that client permission to be honest with us as well, and then trust begins to grow. If we can be honest with our spouses, we give them permission to be honest with us as well, and the relationship thrives. If we can be honest with ourselves, we give ourselves permission to be honest with others, and our relationships begin to thrive. And not only do our relationships begin to thrive, but we begin to see a positive influence that we are having to the world around us. And you see, for me, that word influence is a huge reason why I share my story. To me, influence is a drug. And what I mean by that is when I see that something I have made, or something I have said, or something I have done has positively impacted someone else, that gets me higher than any joint ever could. I promise you that. I can't get enough of it. And that night, when I told my story to those 100 high school students, I saw how something I had to share affected them in a positive way. And in that moment, I made the decision. I decided that storytelling was what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And so that's what I did. I started telling my story anywhere I could. And eventually that led me to start a YouTube channel with some of my friends. And on that channel, you know, we would share my story, I would do some of my poems, things like that. And surprisingly enough, some of our videos started getting pretty popular. I'm talking hundreds of thousands or even millions of views. And it was kind of crazy, right? Because you always hear about stuff like that happening, but you never think it's going to happen to you. But it was crazy to me that now my stories that had started off just being heard by 100 campers, now they were being heard by people all over the world. But with that small success online came the startling realization that not everyone always likes your stories. It was then that I was introduced to the colorful world of YouTube comments. And just for fun today, why don't we read some of my favorites? This sounds great. Now, again, these are actual comments that were left on some of my videos, on videos of things like the poem you just heard. Whoa, this guy is single for sure. Not so. This dude looks like a hammerhead shark. Thank you. Man, this is cringeworthy. So hard to watch. Someone sent me a link by email so I could watch this video. I just wasted 3 minutes and 36 seconds of my life. And pardon my language, I have never heard so much lies and bullshit coming out of someone's mouth. You see, the danger we run with sharing our story is that we open ourselves up to the criticism of others. And that's going to be true for everyone. Maybe not so many comments, but what people think or what we fear people will think. You see, the minute you start to be vulnerable with your friends is the minute you find out who your real friends are. The minute you start being honest in your business is the same minute people will start attacking you for being strange or weird or voodoo. Voodoo? The minute you start trying to give your story to someone is the minute you open yourself up to the possibility that they might reject it. And some people will. And I'll be honest, for a long time it was really hard for me to deal with comments like this. I know that these people are just cowardly people hiding behind a screen, but when they're talking about you, it's hard to not take it personally. And the hardest thing is learning how to not fight back. But I've found that for me in my life, often the best response to criticism is no response at all. And I wish I had listened to my second grade teacher when she talked to me about turning the other cheek or walking away. But it took me 20 more years to figure it out. Because you see, what critics do is they use their energy to make other people worse. Because the only job a critic has is to take you and bring them down to their level. But you see, I made a decision long ago, and that decision is I am not a critic. I am an artist. And what an artist does is an artist uses their energy to try and make themselves better and to try and bring people up to a new level. So anytime I'm faced with criticism, I always say to myself, I am only going to focus on continuing to better myself. So maybe the best response to criticism actually is not no response at all. Maybe the best response to criticism is to focus all your energy, all that energy that you would have used to get back at that person. Instead, take that energy and use it to continue to better yourself. Now, as I mentioned, oh, thank you. Now, as I mentioned before, art is one of the ways that I like to tell stories. But it is also one of the ways that I like to begin to work through problems or issues that I'm facing in my life. And around the time that I was facing a lot of this criticism, I wrote another poem. And I want to share it with you all if that's okay. This is a poem called Work in Progress. Just to be clear with you, I never claimed to be perfect. I never claimed to be finished. I am far from done. Just to be clear with you, I'm a work in progress. A progression of work. A succession towards success, a digression away from stress. Intercession in the midst of my mess comes a blitzing of a blessing, a mauling of mercy, a heaping, helping of hope. Before I start, Before this train leaves the station, I'm starting at the root to set a firm foundation, embracing regeneration and moving inspiration to implementation to the shaking of a nation. It takes more than a little patience to be a work in progress. Piece by piece, elbow grease, a life on lease. My growth will never cease, and I'll decrease so that he may increase and unleash his peace in me in progress. Everybody wants the work to be done quickly. Everybody's looking for some hack. But I'm not interested in magic beans. I'll leave the giant stalk to Jack. Every day I'm working. Every day I'm waking, every day I'm walking, waiting, praying, saying, don't give up, don't give in, just live into who he created you to be. Once was blind, but slowly learning to see. You see, we're all a work in progress, a progression of work. An obsession with succession, peppered with regression, but it's all a lesson. And class is in session because my professor is my progressor and aggressor, pursuing me by teaching me, saving me by reaching me. And it wasn't just by preaching, see, but by living and giving, by crying and dying. I'm a work in progress, and I'll never stop trying. I'm depleted, but not defeated. I'm not a dream, but I'm not a dope either. I may be down, but I'm not done. I'm not dead. I'm developing. I'm not finished yet, but I'm nowhere near where I started. That old self I knew, he and I have parted. And we're no longer related, and I'm elated that he has faded because that guy was overrated. And I'm not saying I'm much better, but I'm a work in progress. A construction zone, a roaming phone, a child not yet fully grown, but I'm slowly being shown the way by the one who calls me his own. I'm not quitting. I'm getting ever closer. And though I may never fully reach it, that's no excuse not to seek it. I'm not just going to speak it, I'm going to live it. I'll walk the walk. I'll walk the work. Just to be clear with you, I'm a work in progress. Thank you. You see, the problem with criticism is it can make us want to fix everything and make everything perfect. Because if we're perfect, then no one can criticize us, yeah? But the problem with perfection, as many of us know, but some of us might need a reminder of, is that perfect is an illusion. Perfect is impossible. And perfect is actually the enemy of progress. In fact, in my life, especially in my life as a storyteller, I've found that it's only when I finally gave myself permission to be imperfect that I was finally able to do anything good. See, a big part of learning how to tell your story is learning how to deal with the imperfections in it. See, our imperfections are what make us human. And our imperfections are actually what make our story so great, because our imperfections are what make our story relatable. And you know something that I never quite understood? Why are we all so obsessed with becoming perfect at everything, rather than focusing on being great at the few things we're really good at? Now, I have one last story to kind of support that statement for you all today, and it's going to bring us back to that camp that I was talking about earlier. You see, after I went and I shared my story at this camp, they invited me back to be a counselor. And for many years throughout college, that was sort of my summer job. And in one of my first years, I was working under this woman, we'll call her Elizabeth. And Elizabeth was the camp director for the week. She was sort of the head counselor. She was my boss. And I will tell you, Elizabeth was a drill sergeant. Now, if you think of like a fun counselor, Elizabeth was the opposite of that, okay? Elizabeth was always just running around haggling everyone about being on time and in line and on schedule. And I'll be honest, if you know an Elizabeth in your life, you know that they can sometimes get on your nerves a little bit. And I'll be honest, some of the other counselors, definitely not me, began to sort of make fun of her sometimes behind her back. Like I said, not me, never me. And as I mentioned, this was a Christian camp. But basically what that means is that on the final night, the gospel message is presented, and there's like a bit of an altar call. Some of you who maybe have had children go to this kind of camp, or you went to this kind of camp growing up, you know what I'm talking about. And now, for teenagers, the message of the gospel can be huge for them, because for those of you who have ever been a teenager, you know that the teenage years can be very, very isolating. You can feel very alone. And the message of the gospel is a message of belonging, and it's a message of home. So the waterworks and the tears can run pretty heavy on this final night of camp. Not just for the campers, but for the counselors as well, right? Because you spend all week with these campers and you have such a heart for them. And when you see them crying, you just want to be there for them. And oftentimes on this last night, we can get very, very off schedule because we're so caught up in the emotion. So on this night, I'm looking around, right? And I see one of my fellow counselors. She's up on stage. She's leading a song. It's beautiful. I'm so proud of her. I see another one of my counselors, and they're up on stage giving a talk and speaking hope into these students' lives. And I'm so excited. And I look at all my fellow counselors, and they're praying with students. They're encouraging them. They're speaking to them. I'm so pumped. And then I look, and sure enough, there was Elizabeth, running around, straightening chairs, replacing tissues, bringing in extra fans because it got too hot, and eventually, in the middle of the height of the emotion, Elizabeth grabs the mic and she goes, "All right, that's it, we have to go to bed." Come on! But you see, as we were walking back to the dorms, I realized that Elizabeth, she was making everything run smoothly. Without her, the entire night would have been a mess. And so we get back, and we're having our counselor meeting after all the campers go to bed. And we're going around taking turns, giving encouragement to everyone for what they did that day. And it gets to my turn, and I look at Elizabeth, and I say, "I don't know how you did it. All the rest of us were so caught up in the emotion of the night, but you somehow didn't allow that to happen, so that you could keep working and serving everyone there." I looked at her and I said, "I saw everything that you did, and we couldn't have done the night without you." And as I finished saying this, Elizabeth started crying. And of course, my reaction as like a 19-year-old guy was like, "What'd I do? I'm sorry." But she started to explain to us that her entire life, she has always struggled with being more of a Martha than a Mary. Meaning that her entire life, she has always been so gifted and so good at administrative tasks and making sure everything runs on time, that oftentimes she's felt extremely inadequate, not only as a counselor, but as a wife, as a mother, because she struggles with making an emotional connection. And as she told me this, I looked at her and I said, "Elizabeth, you know that you don't need to be anything but who God created you to be. We need you, Elizabeth, and we cannot do this without you." And I think that Elizabeth's struggle is the same struggle that we all have. Somehow, and for some reason, we have come to believe that our skill set or our bodies or our gifts somehow are not enough. We're not good enough as a mother or as a business person or as a wife. But something that I believe to my core is that each and every one of us, and that means each and every person in this room, has been created and has been given specific and individual gifts and skills and abilities. And as a Christian, it is my belief that those gifts and abilities, they come from God. And again, if that's not your beat, that's fine. But it doesn't change the truth that you still have them. And a few years ago, I wrote a poem, and it was actually the first poem I ever wrote. And I wrote it to encourage women like Elizabeth, and hopefully all of you in this room here today, that all you need to do, you don't need to be anything but who God created you to be. We need you. And we cannot do this without you. This is a poem called Who You Are, a message to all women. And for the men in the room, I'm sorry, but there's a message to all men. You can look it up on YouTube if you search Who You Are, a message to all men. I'll bring it to the Men of Strength conference. So this will be how I sort of finish my talk. And before I do, I just want to thank you all for listening. I am humbled to be here. What an incredible event this is. Thank you, Susie. Thank you, Todd, for inviting me. I have already learned so much, and I can't wait to spend time here and hopefully connect with you all today. I'll be around until the end of the day, so I'd love to meet you, shake your hand, and yeah. So let's finish this up. This is a poem called Who You Are, and there's a lot of debate online over exactly what the meaning of this poem is. But the only reason that I ever wrote it, the only reason that I speak it, is as a reminder. This is who you are. This is who I believe, women, you were created to be. You are beautiful. You are smart. You are funny. You are kind. And you are unique. You are worthy of love and affection. You are never too much, and you are always enough. You are precious. You are a diamond, a rose, a pearl, the most stunning of all God's creations. You are worth more than you could ever imagine. Worth more than the numbers on the scale, or the hair product you use, or the shoes you wear. More than how many girls wish they were you, or how many guys wish they had you. More than the price tags on your clothes, or the percentage at the top of your math test, or even the number of followers you have on Twitter. Your worth surpasses all earthly things, because in the eyes of the Lord God, you are loved, and you are worth dying for. Regardless of who you think you are, whether you model in a magazine or you model pottery with grandma, whether you're on the hot list or the not list, whether you're head cheerleader or a high school dropout, whether you're Miss Popular or you never had anyone that you could call a friend, whether you love yourself and love your life, or you can't stand to look in the mirror because you feel everything in your life is falling apart, whether you're such a winner or you feel like the world's biggest failure, regardless of who you think you are, the reality is that you deserve someone who would give up their life for you, because you are powerful and strong and capable. Read about the women in the Bible: Esther, Ruth, Martha, Mary. These women changed the world forever, and inside of you, each and every one of you is a woman with that same power and that same strength and that same world-changing capability, and your responsibility is to find that woman and to set that woman free. This is who you are, and any voices in your head that are trying to tell you differently are from the enemy. And the next time you hear them, this is what you say. You say, "Nuh-uh, not me, Satan. I am a daughter of the living God, cherished, loved, and adored above all things by the Creator of all things, for the glory of Him who is greater than all things. I am awesome." And please, don't you forget it. Thank you for having me.